First of all, you'll have to excuse me for my voice this morning. A lot of talking in the last 24 hours. It is fantastic to have Andreas here, and his informative presentation provided some insight for all city leaders that are present on trends of data going forward, the use of data. In particular, his prediction about the next 10 years being all about connecting sensors. This is a particularly interesting thing for city leaders and councils around the world, in how we can use sensors to provide better services to the people of Brisbane and to the people of other cities, and use that data in a way that helps us provide what the residents need from us in a more effective and efficient way. So there's a lot of interesting questions to ponder after today's presentation. I'm going to hand over to Andreas now to say a few words and take any questions that you might have.
So let me first tell you that you are an amazing speaker. So first night I happened to sit next to you. I thought I was just biased because we sat next to each other. Last night I was sort of just simply listening and said, wow, what a great speech. So all I tried this morning is to try to step in your footsteps and try to entertain people.
I didn't ask you to say this.
I totally agree with your point about education being important. So I sometimes talk about data literacy. And if you think about how being able to read and write has changed how people, conduct their lives. That in the Middle Ages, you were dependent on some authority that tells you something, but you had no way of speaking up against them. Gutenberg was technology, the printing press, which really changed religion as well. And so we are now at a similar revolution as far as data goes. It's not literacy being able to turn text into meaning, but literacy being able to turn data into meaning. And so for me, knowing that you are passionate about education, knowing that the good university are also supporting the conference, is actually something which is very, very close to my heart. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
From 480 Community Radio. So in the context of the data you're exposed to, assuming it's Amazon e-commerce data, what does it suggest about livability of cities?
I actually know that livability is in the afternoon today. So I was yesterday when we talked about innovation and mobility. So I am not yet totally sure what the meaning will be, because this conference is where people create stuff. So I don't have an answer, but at the end of the day, we all should have an answer because they are really competent people.
Thank you. I know your number and your email. I'll ask you at the end of the conference.
Okay.
So recently we've seen a big rise in data-driven politics, and you touched earlier in your speech about bias of data mining.
Yes.
So those who do not have access to technology or readily available, there's kind of black holes, maybe black spots on the information we know. Given that Australia is a huge country and we do have a lot of rural communities and hard-reach communities that don't have technology as accessible as cities, how do you think politics can work around that, those black spots, to actually get the information and the data they need from people who don't readily use technology?
So I don't know what the numbers are of internet penetration by user in Australia. I know that in China, the percentage of people having smartphones is, I think it's like 80 or 90%. It's incredible. So while your point, I think I would have fully bought in a few years ago, at this stage, I think and the fact that Australia is big, where people are, there is also mobile coverage. Let me give you some examples from Africa, where the phones actually leapfrogging the landlines, the mobile phones, help with many services. For example, if in a big country you need to find a spot to put the next, not really a hospital, but place where if people can sick, they can go. Then knowing where people go based on the carriers, knowing where people's phones are, actually allows you to make better planning on not really city level, because we're talking really about the very, very rural area right now, but planning for services. So that's an example where I don't think that the argument that it is still largely the elites who have access to phones, to the internet, that doesn't really, I think, cut it anymore. What we can learn now, and I deliberately took the example with the pothole because I wanted to show that something well-intended still has a bias, and I want people to become data literate and figure out that those biases exist. Now, the standard examples, of course, are that, and I know police is not in the cities in Australia, but if you look for people who were found, with drug possession, it of course has a bias that you only find when you're looking for something. And all the biases that police people are more likely to maybe ask people of color to check them for drugs than white people. Those biases, of course, are all built in, and that's well known. But I think for the access question, Hillary Clinton, a few years ago, said we should have a right to be connected. It should be like a human right. Like we need to have a right to access water, to have electricity, but also the right to connectivity, like a human right. So I'm actually with her that this is something which we really should think about providing to citizens, because otherwise they don't have much of a chance to actually come with us.
Further to your question, further to your answer, in terms of private sectors having the data mining, how is it accessible for politicians and governments who have an actual imperative to use it for the good rather than a financial imperative?
Difficult question. So Amazon Web Services runs more organizations than you think. I mean, like, the agencies in the US all run Amazon Web Service, AWS. And 2 or 3 months ago, Amazonians, in a letter to Jeff Bezos, asked for a complete list of which agency uses what from Amazon. Face recognition being one of the very critical examples, because people get turned away at borders, or I don't know the details, but that's what concerned people, that their technology is now used not for the people, but against the people. Very problematic. And Jeff decided, based on what the board told him, to basically not answer the question, which I found a little disappointing. But I was not there, and I only saw a copy of the letter. So I think part of transparency is that you should be very clear what your technology is used for. So that was somewhat tangential. You asked me, how can governments use technology? Governments buy the technologies from the Googles, Microsofts, Amazons of the world. And so that would be sort of the answer. Where is the research done? The research is not done in academia. The research is not done in governments. But the research is done in-house in those places. Why? Because that's where the data is. You can't do research on data without having the data. And it's way too complicated to try to, as we saw with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, with the problems there, to try to actually give the data to somebody else to do research. And Google has said for 20 years, want to do cool research? Come work for us. Same at Amazon, same at Microsoft. Yeah. And I think governments really opening their data. That's where you can get value across cities. And doing that in a way that is, in Europe I would say GDPR compliant, in a way that respects and empowers individuals, that I think is an important part how cities can really learn and contribute, and as a whole be better off than if they only have the individual city silos.
Any other questions?
You answered my question already.
One of the things that I wanted to say that came out of the presentation is the action that San Francisco has taken on face recognition. And that is now something that you have to go away and investigate.
You have to, yeah.
Ultimately, just because something can be done doesn't mean it should be done. I understand face recognition can be used in situations like airports where there's international security issues at play. But personally, I don't believe that face recognition should be used in a place like the Queen Street Mall or in those public places. People do have the right to move around our city and have some level of privacy. And so this will be something that we will be investigating now as a council to determine what the appropriate policy is when it comes to use of face recognition in public places in Brisbane.
I think it's actually super, super important to really think, what are our fears? What really are the fears that your citizens have? And that is how I would start the investigation, to meet with citizens and take their concerns very, really genuine. That try to peel back some layers of the onion from, it's no good, to what really are you concerned about? And then I think when people understand more, then they will be able to make decisions of, whether the benefits maybe outweigh the risk for them once they become aware of what the risk for them really are. I personally post, for instance, all my details about every single flight on my website on weigend.com/where. You can sit and see what seat I'm sitting on in 2 days from now. I used to also publish my PNR, my 6-letter code, until I realized that if you know my PNR, my last name, you can change my reservation. That's why I decided I am not going to make that situation impossible. But what people's fears are about data. So for me, it's the fear about wrong data. It can be a lot of work. I just got a message that the United States of America revoked my global entry card. And I have a US passport. And before my last trip, I ordered some Ambien over the internet. And I was actually, to be honest, I was not aware that that was not legal to order, just Canadian pharmacies. And they intercepted it. And when I entered the US, they asked me very professionally whether I have another passport. I gave them my German passport. Or whether I have a driver's license. I gave them a driver's license. Whether anybody else is living at that address. I said, yeah, so and so. And then she looked at me and said, a package with a controlled substance has been intercepted. I said, oh, that was the Ambien which didn't arrive. Yes. So I totally owned it. But then I got just a note a couple of days ago that the privilege of a global entry card, given this violation, cannot be extended any further. And I think it's no big deal. As long as I have a passport. And if you take it away, I get my German passport. But it is interesting how the global entry gives them more and more data. And that the agencies so tightly work together that the mail delivery person, punches some things, and then when I enter the US, I get pulled out of the line and interrogated. I was surprised about that.
I think there's another question.
Within the private sector, what rights do you think individuals should have to request their data to be deleted?
Data deletion is not one of the rights I have in my list. So it's a very tricky one. The EU, of course, has the right to be forgotten, which is forcing Google to de-link, to have certain things not show up anymore that you just, for whatever reason, might not want to show up about yourself. That is a right to be forgotten, right to be linked, but it's not a right to delete. I think there cannot be such a right, and I'm very careful in formulating rights that can actually be done. There's no way, in the way how data is stored right now, For example, if there is a major earthquake in San Francisco, in the San Francisco Bay Area, then Google, Facebook, etc., of course, they want to have data centers in other parts of the world. If there is a major problem in one country with a political riot, or if you think back at 9/11, you do want data at many places in the world. So this right to have my data deleted cannot be that somebody really deletes all copies of your data. That's just simply impossible. So we have to ask, what does it mean? And what it has to mean is that the cost of using data, the company says we are not using anymore because you told them so. Well, that cost has to be very high. You have to just penalize people who use data you asked to be deleted, just as you get penalized if you steal a bicycle. So it is just something which the company and you agree, and the company doesn't do it, so they continue to use your data, and then they get fined. So I think there is not a technical solution to that. It can't be, but there have to be legislation and regulatory solutions. And GDPR there, I think, is a step in the right direction of really levying large fines. Now, I think more important than just fining companies is to get companies and governments to actually share data. Because if you share data, you suddenly have a whole ecosystem of people, students, who want to play with your data. And you're just much more innovation going on than if you go to a government contract and convince them to write the next version of whatever you need. So my view is the deletion is an illusion. If you say you don't want something to be used, or if you want to say something is wrong about you, which was another data fears, then you need to punish companies that continue to do that. But in the bigger picture, I think getting companies, forcing them to share a certain part of their data so the ecosystem can kick in, and other people, smaller companies, have a chance to also develop things, is, I think, much more for the benefit of society than just slapping fines onto them. And there will be mistakes. There will be problems. I lost my entire YouTube channel. YouTube lost my entire channel because a robot went over it, and it couldn't be recovered because the EU has this right to, after 2 weeks, they have to purge the data. And the only thing Google could do is say, oh, the user requested for the channel to be deleted. Bullshit. I never requested it. There was no email, no nothing, and I had some internal screenshots to show how it happened. But that's inappropriate for me to show to them. And of course, Google could not say, "Oh, we found them again," because then I would have gone to Angela Merkel and said, "See, they say they purged, but here is my copy." And that would have been untenable for anybody to find. So it's tricky. It's tricky. But respecting and empowering the citizens, the consumers, is a very good line, I think, to ask yourself.
My final question, I promise. Thanks, everyone. I wanted to query then, if we can't delete the data, what rights do citizens have to access their data for free? Because in Australia we have freedom of information.
Great.
However, it's not free at times. So have to pay for the man hours to get your own information.
I think no, but that is, that's a similar question to any government services. This one, I think, for me, the costs probably are minimal. So I think, so who would build the systems? Who would pay for the systems to be built? I mean, you with the tax money. So I think in the US you have to pay the dollars for photocopying each page or something, truly ridiculous, arcane methods of charging for things. I don't know how these charges are. I would think that you want to do it as self-service as possible. That's, I think, where you ultimately want to go. So, for example, Facebook, you can export your own data, But one of these examples how Facebook is just so dishonest, so lack of integrity is that you could think that they send you a message on Facebook Messenger because they control Messenger when your data is ready to be exported. But no, they send you an email, which of course they can say, oh, we cannot be responsible for the email to be delivered. So I think I just hate about Facebook this lack of integrity. So that's a completely different question, but you could build the tools to make it possible. And what GDPR does very well is to say that the data have to be exported in a format that is commonly readable. So just giving you a dump of the bits of your data is not cutting it. But Google does a wonderful job in geolocation. I'm not sure whether any of you had a chance to look at your own location history data. It's crazy how good a job Google is doing on that. That they figure out where you are. They know from your mobile phone, if you have Chrome on your iPhone or Android phone for sure, they know where you are. And it's very difficult to remove. And then they suggest, last time you were there, that seemed to be have a 90-minute foot massage you got there because it's a foot massage place. Would you like to contact them again when you're back in Brisbane? But it gets, of course, tricky if the specialty doctor, let's say, abortion clinic, then, it quickly gets very tricky again to have, this precise data. And that is just the obvious one is, here's another interesting law which came out in San Francisco, California, last week. There's a company which does something very innocent. They look at license plates. And the purpose of a license plate clearly is to identify the car, right? I mean, there's no question about this. Called Vigilant Solutions. They take all these pictures, they mount cameras on lamp posts, they even have, for a fee, you can, we pay you if you put in a camera in your car wherever you are driving. It just does one thing only, it looks at license plates. And so suddenly you have that database of the statewide movement patterns of all cars, which is stitched together based on those individual pictures that private company takes of license plates. Wow, I think this is very interesting. And so, your partner might call you from work and saying, honey, I have to work late again. And then you just look at where the car was. And you're not putting a device on the car or anything like this. You just have a company look at license plates. So I think we are really, it's day one of us having to think. So California right now has an investigation which of these things should just be not allowed. And it's an interesting one because the license plates clearly are not like peeping Tom into your. Another question is drones. So I think it's day one that we have to think about. You used to be safe somewhere. And now somebody can, with 50 miles an hour, send a drone and hover over your terrace or whatever you are and take pictures. That's one of the fears I have, that those drone pictures taken out of context, man, I mean, you can spend all day long then testifying and talking to lawyers. So, tricky. This is my data fears. Who else has questions?
Sorry everyone, we're going to have to wrap up just because of time. I'm really sorry about that, but thank you all for coming.
You can always send a drone over and ask her.
Thank you.
Lord Mayor, thank you.